Jesus describes himself as a shepherd. For many of us living in the United States today, the idea of a sheep or shepherd is far beyond our reality, isn't it? While there are farmers who raise and herd sheep here in this nation, there are far more of us who have probably never seen a sheep in real life than those who have. In most children's Christian literature illustrations, Jesus is depicted as a smiling, tall, thin white man with a staff, surrounded by sheep, right? And the sheep somehow are aware of who he is, smiling in his presence. They too are joyful. But this is a cartoon interpretation, isn't it? Shepherds smell like sheep. It's true. And sheep smell like outside. Like grass, like dirt, like sweat, like rain, like whatever they were chewing on. Even more, sheep will fight for dominance. They will throw themselves at each other at speeds up to 20 miles per hour. This goes on for hours sometimes, often until one ram gives up and walks off. Luckily, these creatures have protective skulls that keep them from truly injuring themselves. And Jesus is there for all of it. Why do I know so much about sheep? Well, one year when I was in Palestine, I met a shepherd and he broke all this down to me. I had no idea that sometimes they go on for hours just ramming each other. But centuries of nursery rhymes and children's books have taught us to think of sheep as soft and fluffy creatures. Yes? Or am I alone in this? Right? No, right? But in the wild, they fight. They compete for limited resources. The bigger ones take advantage of the smaller ones. They challenge each other to the point of boxing matches, just like earlier this morning, David and the piano. See? And Jesus is there for all of it. In one of the most famous vignettes of his life, Jesus intervenes in a true clash. Although to call it a clash would be to mute the power differential on this example. You might recognize the story. A woman is about to be stoned by the town, for she was caught in adultery. Jesus puts his body on the line and interrupts the violence. He doesn't allow himself to be a bystander. Although he easily could have enjoyed the privilege of manhood and walked by, instead, he stops the scene, doesn't he? He pushes those with stones to reflect on what they're getting ready to do. I quote, "If anyone here is without sin, let him be the one to cast the first stone." Everyone dropped their stone at the sound of his voice. What a voice. And they will listen to my voice, as we heard Roy read to us. And they did on that day, didn't they? You see, to serve as a shepherd, one must be wise. One must also be willing to take on the burden of the ones they serve. You see, I believe Jesus goes out of his way from beginning to end to show people that he's not here to get a check and bounce. I think you know what I mean by bouncing, right? Like leaving, okay. He's not detached from the people. When he asks, "How are you?" he stays for the answer. Jesus invests emotionally into the care of these sheep. He understands that part of the job description means that you will have to fight off some wolves. He promises to connect the sheep outside of the fold into this one. He promises to put these cohorts of sheep together, thus strengthening their potential for solidarity and cooperative living. And yet, I believe he is not the center of the story. Jesus is just stewarding an already living, breathing ecosystem. He's only supporting a community that already exists without him. So on this Earth Day, just like I believe Jesus is not detached from the people, I want to suggest that we continue also not to be detached from planet Earth. Just as Jesus was emotionally invested into the care of these sheep, let us also continue to be emotionally invested in planet Earth. And just as Jesus helps strengthen the potential for solidarity and cooperative life, I want to suggest that we do the same and follow the lead of indigenous communities fighting for planet Earth, for environmental justice, and that we may continue to figure out ways to ally with these communities. Let us be here for all of it. Let us remember the way so many people around the world have and continue to fight for planet Earth. Let us remember when people like Waldomiro Costa Pereira are being murdered for trying to protect their land from rapacious corporations and wealthy landowners. Pereira, who was affiliated with the landless workers movement, was killed on March 20, 2017. When half the world was celebrating the beginning of spring, gunmen stormed the hospital in which he was recovering from a previous assassination attempt. He stood up for poor farmers, a heroic act that cost him his life. Let's remember Chico Mendez, who was an environmentalist that fought to preserve the Amazon rainforest and advocated for the human rights of Brazilian peasants and indigenous peoples. He was struck down in 1988 by a single shotgun blast fired by the son of a cattle rancher, irked that he had been denied the right to cut down a fresh tract because of Chico Mendes. Let's remember Luis Alberto Araujo, a Brazilian government official in the environmental office, who was shot dead in his car in front of his family in 2016. Araujo had broken up a deforestation operation that relied on slave labor, reported a hydroelectric dam operated for causing the death of 16 tons of fish, and helped shut down a gold mine that was poisoning an indigenous tribe's food supply. And lastly, I believe, yes, let's remember human rights and environmental activist Berta Cáceres, who courageously dedicated her life to the struggle for human rights, in particular those of the indigenous people of Honduras. She co-founded the National Council of Popular and Indigenous Organization of Honduras and fought for not only its members' rights, but also improving their livelihood. The Society for Justice and Peace granted her the Shalom Award in 2012, and she also received the Goldman Environmental Prize in 2016. And it was in 2016 that she was assassinated in her home by armed intruders after many years of threats in her life for protecting planet Earth. People are dying for God's earth and for indigenous communities, aren't they? So let us not be afraid and be here for all of it. For all of it. Because there is evil that reigns with impunity against people working for environmental justice. This Earth Day, let us come up and figure out ways to tell these truths. The truth that there is a life and death struggle being waged against corrupt governments, companies, and criminal gangs that are seizing lands from people in order to meet the demand for minerals, timber, fossil fuels, and as we have heard many stories now, cobalt for all the tech titans. I know it's not the usual Earth Day message, but I just felt that it's not too often that we don't think about the martyrs that are inspired because Earth Day, the idea, the concept of Earth Day started. And I do want to suggest that Earth Day be a time to remember these martyrs, who are models for me of courage for refusing to renounce their faith in the sacredness of earth and indigenous communities, and the virtues of integrity and radical compassion without which the human species will dwindle to extinction. These murdered men and women of Brazil, Colombia, Peru, the Philippines, and many other countries have in fact been martyred. And I believe they need to be mourned and honored for the heroes that they are. So on Earth Day, let us stand in solidarity with the earth martyrs and pray that we may have such dedication and courage in whatever way that may be. And I'm not saying we all need to go out there and be martyrs. I'm not saying that. But we all bring different gifts and are given different opportunities and platforms to be as courageous as they are. And so I'm trusting in the mercy of a Creator who declared this planet good, and not for the sake of commodification, but simply because it exists. And we know that existence is strengthened more each day, don't we? So we can no longer take it for granted, I believe. So let us continue to imagine in ways, again, how to be in solidarity with those fighting for planet Earth, and how all of us could be there for all of it. Amen. See, I did not leave this time.